when I decided to take AP English Language, my friends looked at me in complete disbelief. They're like, "Are you sure you want to take that class? I mean, you know that class is hard." But I took it anyways. And I remember one day we were talking about a book and going back and forth on opinions. And after the class discussion was over, my teacher had announced that he wanted people to join an extemporaneous speaking club. And now, I know you can already imagine the comments from a couple of these kids, like, "Who would do that? That's so nerdy. Ugh, what a waste of time." So I said, "Me, I want to do it." And everyone looked at me weird, and I thought for a moment that I might regret that. But I needed to do something to prove myself. And my teacher, he just looked at me with this smile on his face, and he goes, "See you at practice Tuesday." Hi, everybody. My name is Addison Kelley, and today I'm going to talk to you about what to do with your potential when faced with negative perceptions from other people. Now, for years, I was obsessed with people's perceptions of me. It controlled the way I walked, the way I talked, the way I ate, just the overall way I acted. And although this might seem normal for your typical teenage girl, it shouldn't be. I mean, people should feel comfortable in their own skin and doing what they want to do. And for weeks after the choice of doing extemporaneous speaking, I really thought about not doing it. I mean, am I capable of standing up on stage in front of judges and speaking on international affairs? I was worried that I would say one thing wrong and it would confirm my biggest fear, that I was just another dumb, pretty girl. And I really began to think that I couldn't do it. I mean, did I focus too much on how my curls looked rather than the up-to-date news on US and China global trade wars? Did I spend too much time in the tanning bed rather than educating myself on Trump's foreign tariffs? And I really thought that all I ever was, or all I ever will be, was just an outgoing, maybe too talkative, at least she's pretty on the outside, girl. And now this feeling isn't one of a kind. I mean, there is significant research that shows that people have been negatively evaluated based on their looks. I mean, BBC News says that 80% of girls or women feel that their looks are the most important thing about them. 47% said that their looks have held them back from speaking up on certain things. But let me introduce you to a bias that's very prevalent in my world, not only in male-dominated industries, but also in high school. Maybe with your first grader or your niece who's going into college. Science Direct calls this the beauty is beastly effect. And this is just a form of sex discrimination that negatively evaluates women based on their looks when applying for jobs. But this is where it interests me. The definition is someone uses this bias when they look at someone and think that they're incompetent or incapable of doing things based on what they look like. Now, with all that I've just said, it might seem as if I'm saying girls or women are at a disadvantage in life because of what they look like. But that's not my message. You are capable, despite what people think, to push and apply yourself and do hard things. You just have to learn to overcome and block out what people have to say about it. And trust me when I say, I know that is a very hard thing, but it is a very valuable lesson to learn. Allow people to have their own thoughts and reactions and judgments about you. I mean, if they think I'm weird for doing extemporaneous speaking, then oh well. If they think I'm weird for coming up here and talking to you guys, then oh well. Do not sit around and wait for what you want to do to become socially acceptable, because trust me when I say, you will be waiting a while. Now, the hardest part about this was probably educating myself in a completely different aspect of things, politics. Now, nobody wants to talk about how hard it is to speak about politics because it's just something that changes so often. And I think the hardest thing was asking questions. I love the saying, there's no such thing as a dumb question. Are you sure? I mean, people would look at me so weirdly. Apparently, it's obvious that the reason Putin's invading Ukraine is to prevent Western alignment. And I would just say I was joking, and that was a pop quiz, and they passed, and I'd move on to the next conversation. And learning this was tough, but I made the adjustment. I voluntarily gave up my Vampire Diaries time to watch the almost 2-hour-long State of the Union address. Yes. But the most empowering thing about this was probably my ability to create and form my own opinions. I was always surrounded by such entitled people who would blurt out their opinions on politics. And just when I would get curious enough to ask a question, they would hit me with the, "You don't really look like the type. You don't really look like you would understand that." And in the moment, I laughed, and I turned my head, and I started the next conversation. But me ignoring those doubtful comments wasn't because I couldn't comprehend politics, but rather because I allowed people's opinions to reaffirm and overtake what I knew I could do. I was more comfortable being labeled the dumb, pretty girl instead of stepping outside of my comfort zone and doing things that not everyone else was doing. And in stepping outside of my comfort zone, I got the opportunity to learn about the Afghani woman under the Taliban regime. These women are forced to follow very strict dress codes, as you can see, guidelines. They have restrictions on employment and housing opportunities and are really just confined to their homes. And this had me reflect on myself and how I hold myself. I'm an American, raised and born, and I've just been given this opportunity to do whatever I want with my life, free of prosecution, with no restriction of my rights. So why am I worried? Why am I prohibiting myself from stepping outside of my comfort zone and doing stuff I want to do? It really created a sense of responsibility in me. It really made me self-evaluate. But now I want to tell you about another experience with a boy. Now, I couldn't tell you how this conversation got brought up, but we were with a group of friends, and he talked about politics. And going back and forth with a couple people, and I tried to put my foot in the conversation, and he looks at me and he goes, "Well, you probably wouldn't know much on this." And I laughed. I said, "Try me." He starts quizzing me on political leaders and going back and forth on why this is that way and why this is this way. And just when I had proved myself knowledgeable enough, he began to argue. And this really shocked me. This is the most fascinating part of this conversation. He began to insult me and my beliefs and what I thought was right or wrong with the world we live in today. And I just smiled and continued to explain myself to the best of my ability without insulting him. And it really got me to reflect, not only how we treat people, but how we treat people who are different than us. I'm not going to date a boy based on if they're Democratic or Republican. I'm going to date a boy based on their respect they have for people despite those differences. Someone and their beliefs doesn't define who they are, but rather how somebody treats people with different beliefs. That defines who they are. Society has convinced us that we all have this one common enemy, but the truth is, the only one thing we ever have in common is being a part of the human race. And truthfully, if you were all forced to be the same, you wouldn't want it. I wouldn't have known that if I didn't study the world we live in today. And now I'm not saying you have to go out and study politics in order to become the best version of yourself, but I am saying you need to step outside of your comfort zone. You need to push yourself. And you will need to speak up. I mean, I wouldn't be who I am today without speaking. Thanks.